The dim light from the hallway spilled into Eric's room as I carefully pushed the door open. My ocular membranes adjusted quickly, taking in the chaotic clutter humans were so fond of. And there he was, sprawled on his primitive sleeping apparatus, his limbs akimbo, mouth slightly open, emitting low-frequency vibrations they called snoring. But it wasn't the unsettling noise or even his peculiar sleeping position that caught my attention. No, it was the gleaming metallic object jutting out from his grip, half covered by one of their primitive textiles. I froze. My tendrils coiled instinctively, the universal response of a Thark when confronted with an anomaly. The object was cylindrical, with multiple protrusions and what appeared to be a grip mechanism. My two most plausible conclusions. It was either a weapon, though its purpose eluded me, or, given humans' propensity for grotesque displays, a reproductive appendage of some sort. What was the protocol for this? Had I accidentally triggered a human mating ritual by entering unannounced? My kind was strictly taught to avoid unnecessary interaction with their tools, biological or otherwise, given humanity's tendency to overinterpret. But here I was, unable to retreat without at least cataloging the object for future reference. I mean, what kind of roommate would I be if I ignored a potential intergalactic scandal in the making? A loud creak echoed as one of my legs brushed against his ancient floorboards. His eyes fluttered open, his face twisting into an expression humans described as groggy. He squinted at me, the corners of his mouth twitching upward in what I now recognize as their strange humor reflex. Thark? What are you doing? His voice was heavy with the remnants of sleep, but his hand flexed around the object. Enjoying the view? I wasn't enjoying anything. I stammered, retracting slightly, trying to keep my tendrils from visibly quivering. Your tool is exposed, Eric. He blinked, then his lips curved into what I immediately classified as a mischievous grin. He held the object aloft. Oh, this old thing? It's my special tool. Thought you'd appreciate the craftsmanship. I could feel my membranes flush with heat, the universal equivalent of embarrassment. Craftsmanship? That's what you call it. Of course, he said, sitting up and giving it an exaggerated twirl in his hand. Built for versatility. Want to try it out? No! The word escaped before I could stop myself, my tone sharp. Why would you offer such a thing so casually? Is this normal behavior among your kind? He tilted his head, his expression a masterful blend of innocence and amusement. You've never held one before? I've seen enough of your species to know better than to touch your contraptions. I shot back, unsure whether I was more annoyed by his teasing or the fact that I was genuinely unsure of the object's purpose. He laughed, a sound that resonated in that peculiar human way, simultaneously infuriating and oddly endearing. Relax, Thark. It's just a wrench. A wrench? I repeated, the term unfamiliar. And what, exactly, is a wrench supposed to do? It's a tool, he explained, his grin widening. Used for fixing things, tightening bolts, you know. Not everything is as suggestive as you think it is. You deliberately phrased it in a manner to elicit discomfort, I accused, my tendrils twitching with indignation. Do all humans find humor in such indecency? It's called a joke, buddy, he replied, leaning back on his elbows. You should try it sometime. Might loosen you up a bit. Loosen me up? I'll have you know Tharks are a highly evolved species with no need for crude humor to communicate effectively, I retorted. But even as I said it, I knew I sounded defensive, which only seemed to fuel his amusement. Right, he said, nodding sagely, though his expression betrayed his mockery. Highly evolved, yet you thought I was just, what? Flaunting myself for no reason? My membranes flushed again, and I cursed the biological reaction. Your kind is known for unpredictable behavior. I wouldn't put it past you. He chuckled, setting the wrench aside. You know, if I didn't know better, I'd say you're a little obsessed with me, Thark. Obsessed? I would rather digest live gravel than spend unnecessary time analyzing your primitive ways. Could have fooled me, he said, smirking. You've been standing there for a good 5 minutes staring. I was analyzing the object for potential threat levels, I snapped. Your species is notoriously dangerous. Dangerous? He repeated, leaning forward. And what exactly did you think my tool was going to do? Seduce you? The way he said it, so casually, so brazenly, made my tendrils bristle. You're insufferable. And you're fun to mess with. He shot back, reclining again with an air of triumph. Admit it, you find humans fascinating. Fascinating is not the word I would use, I muttered, though I was acutely aware of how unconvincing I sounded. My curiosity about his bizarre species was something I'd never openly admit. He yawned, stretching in a way that seemed deliberately exaggerated. Well, as much as I'd love to keep this riveting conversation going, I need my beauty sleep. Don't want to disappoint you next time you catch me with my tool out. I growled, a low sound that translated poorly across species. There will not be a next time. We'll see about that, he said, winking as he lay back down. Night, Thark. As I stormed out of the room, my tendrils still twitching in irritation, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever truly understand the human sense of humor. Or why, despite its infuriating nature, I found it oddly compelling. The morning started with Eric's irritating whistle as he sauntered into the common area. I was still trying to process the absurdity of last night's interaction, but he seemed completely unfazed. In fact, he seemed unusually chipper. I didn't trust it. Morning, sunshine, he said, sliding a cup of what humans called coffee across the table toward me. Sleep well? No dreams about my tool, I hope. I ignored him, focusing instead on adjusting the nutrient solution in my hydration chamber. The last thing I needed was another conversation about his infernal contraptions. Unfortunately, humans had a remarkable ability to persist even in the face of blatant disinterest. You know, he continued, leaning on the counter with a grin that could only be described as infuriating. I've been thinking. Maybe I should teach you a thing or two about tools. Could be fun. Bonding, even. I have no need for your primitive implements, I replied without looking at him. The technology of my species is far superior in every way. Yeah? Can your superior technology fix a leaky faucet? He shot back, clearly pleased with himself. I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I focused on recalibrating the flow of nutrients. But out of the corner of my vision, I noticed him fiddling with something on the counter, a small, cylindrical object with blinking lights. I tensed immediately. What is that? I demanded. Oh, this? He held it up, the lights reflecting in his eyes. Just a little something I whipped up. It's harmless. Probably. Probably? Well, it hasn't exploded yet, so that's promising. I glared at him. Your recklessness is going to get us both killed one day. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that only irritated me further. Relax, Thark. Life's more fun with a little chaos. You should try it. Chaos is not fun, I snapped. It is dangerous and irresponsible. That's what makes it fun, he countered, tossing the device lightly in his hand before setting it down with a smug grin. But I get it. You're not wired for fun. Must be tough. I bristled at the insinuation. I am perfectly capable of engaging in enjoyable activities. Oh, really? He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Name one. I opened my mouth to respond but quickly realized I didn't have an answer that would satisfy his obnoxious standards. My idea of enjoyment, meticulous data analysis and controlled experimentation, was unlikely to impress someone who found entertainment in juggling volatile objects. Exactly what I thought, he said, leaning back with a smirk. You're wound tighter than I'd say a screw, but I'm guessing that'd go over your head. Your humor is juvenile, I said coldly. And your arrogance will be your downfall. Maybe, he admitted with a shrug. But at least I'm having fun while I'm at it. I decided to end the conversation there, retreating to the relative safety of my quarters. But Eric's laughter followed me, echoing in my auditory receptors long after I'd closed the door. Hours later, I returned to the common area only to find it littered with a variety of objects, tools, as Eric called them. They were scattered across the floor, the counter, even the chairs. It was as if he'd emptied an entire workshop into our shared space. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded. "Oh, hey, you're back!" Eric emerged from behind the couch, holding yet another bizarre contraption. "Thought I'd give you a crash course in human engineering." "You're welcome. I did not ask for this," I said through gritted teeth. "Yeah, but you need it," he replied, tossing me a wrench. I caught it instinctively, staring at the cold metal in my grasp. "Go ahead. Get a feel for it." "I failed to see the point of this exercise," I said, turning the object over in my hands. "The point," he said, walking over to me, "is to loosen you up. You're too serious all the time, Thark. Life's short, well, mine is anyway, and you're wasting it worrying about things that don't matter." "Things that don't matter?" I repeated, incredulous. "Like ensuring our survival?" "Exactly," he grinned. "You can't enjoy life if you're constantly focused on surviving. Sometimes you gotta stop and smell the, whatever it is you smell." "That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." "Maybe," he said, grabbing another tool from the pile. "But you're still holding that wrench, so I must be doing something right." I looked down at the object in my hand, realizing I had been absent-mindedly turning it over, examining its design. I hated that he was right. There was something oddly satisfying about its simplicity. But I refused to give him the satisfaction of admitting it. "This is a waste of time," I said, tossing the wrench back to him. "Suit yourself," he replied, catching it with ease. "But don't come crying to me when you can't fix your nutrient dispenser." "That will never happen," I said firmly. "Sure," he said with a wink. "Never." The rest of the evening was relatively uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Eric was planning something. His smug expression as I left the room suggested he wasn't done with his so-called lessons. And as much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't entirely blame him. For all his irritating behavior, there was a strange logic to his madness. Perhaps there was something to be said for embracing the chaos, if only to better understand the enigma that was humanity. Later that evening, the door chimed, signaling the arrival of visitors. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was one of Eric's many questionable acquaintances. But when the door slid open, it revealed two tall, imposing figures in Galactic Housing Authority uniforms. Their sleek armor gleamed under the artificial lighting, and their faces bore the unmistakable expressions of bureaucratic disdain. "Resident Thark and Resident Eric?" one of them asked, his tone clipped and professional. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "What is the purpose of your visit?" "We've received a report of unauthorized devices and potential contraband within this unit," the second officer said, pulling out a data pad. "Standard procedure requires a full inspection." I turned to Eric, who was lounging on the couch with a smug grin. "What did you do?" "Me?" he said, feigning innocence. "I didn't report anything." "Don't play dumb," I hissed. "Your antics have clearly drawn their attention." The officers stepped inside, their scanners already sweeping the room. One of them paused near the counter, picking up one of Eric's tools. It was a small, vibrating device he'd been tinkering with earlier. The officer held it up, his expression unreadable. "What is the purpose of this device?" he asked. Eric leaned back, casually folding his arms behind his head. "Oh, that? It's a personal relaxation tool. Helps with stress relief." My tendrils bristled as the officer's gaze flicked between Eric and me. "Stress relief?" "Yeah," Eric said with a straight face. "You know, long days, tense muscles, it really works wonders." The officer didn't seem convinced. "It's emitting an unusual energy signature. Are you aware of the regulations regarding unlicensed energy-emitting devices?" "Oh, absolutely," Eric replied. "But that's not unlicensed. I made it myself. Custom job. That's even worse," the officer muttered, handing the device to his partner for further analysis. I could feel my membranes heating with embarrassment and frustration. Eric, do you have any idea how much trouble you're causing? Relax, Thark, he said with a wink. It's just a little misunderstanding. They'll figure it out. This is not a misunderstanding, I snapped. Your reckless behavior is going to get us evicted, or worse. As the officers continued their inspection, one of them activated another of Eric's devices. This one emitted a loud, high-pitched whirring sound before shooting a stream of glitter into the air. The room was instantly filled with a sparkling cloud of chaos. What is the purpose of this? The officer demanded, coughing as he tried to clear the glitter from his visor. That's a party enhancement device, Eric said, barely containing his laughter. You know, for celebrations. Celebrations? The officer's tone was icy. This is a clear violation of multiple safety protocols. Eric shrugged. Depends on how you define safety. Personally, I think it's pretty safe, unless you're allergic to fun. I groaned, burying my face in my tendrils. This is a disaster. The officers were clearly losing patience. Resident Eric, if we find any additional violations, we will have no choice but to issue a citation. Go ahead, Eric said with a grin. I'm sure you'll find plenty to write about. The officers moved to inspect the rest of the apartment, their scanners beeping incessantly as they catalogued every one of Eric's contraptions. I could only stand there, seething, as he continued to play it cool. You're enjoying this, I accused him. Maybe a little, he admitted. But come on, Thark, you have to admit it's funny. It is not funny, I said through gritted teeth. It is infuriating. You say that now, but I bet you'll be laughing about this later, he said, his grin unwavering. One of the officers returned, holding yet another one of Eric's devices. This one resembled a small, cylindrical object with blinking lights and a suspiciously sharp edge. And this? The officer asked. Oh, that's a multifunctional culinary implement, Eric said without missing a beat. Great for slicing, dicing, and other things. Other things? The officer repeated, clearly unimpressed. Yeah, you know, like slicing really tough alien fruit, Eric said, his grin widening. Want a demonstration? The officer glared at him. No, thank you. As the inspection dragged on, I could feel my patience wearing thin. Eric's flippant attitude was only making things worse, and the officers were clearly not amused. But just when I thought things couldn't get any more absurd, one of the devices began to beep loudly. What's that? The officer demanded. Eric's grin faltered for the first time. That's a proximity alert. Totally harmless. The device continued to beep, its lights flashing more rapidly with each passing second. The officers exchanged wary glances before backing away. Deactivate it immediately, one of them ordered. Yeah, about that. Eric trailed off, scratching the back of his head. It might take a minute. The controls are a little finicky. The device let out a final, piercing beep before erupting in a shower of sparks. The officers dove for cover, and I barely managed to shield myself with my tendrils as the room was enveloped in chaos. When the smoke cleared, the officers were glaring at Eric with barely contained fury. This is beyond unacceptable, one of them said, his voice trembling with anger. You will both be receiving citations, and this unit will be flagged for further investigation. Fair enough, Eric said with a shrug. But, before you go, can I offer you some glitter remover? It's great for getting that sparkle out of your armor. The officers stormed out without another word, leaving me alone with Eric in the wreckage of our apartment. I turned to him, my tendrils twitching with barely restrained rage. This is all your fault, I said. Hey, look on the bright side, he said, brushing glitter off his shirt. At least we're not boring. I stared at him, my frustration boiling over. You are the most insufferable creature I have ever encountered. And yet here we are, he said with a smirk. Admit it, Thark, you'd miss me if I wasn't around. I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I retreated to my quarters, leaving him to deal with the mess he'd created. But as much as I hated to admit it, there was a small part of me that couldn't help but admire his ability to find humor in even the most ridiculous situations. The aftermath of the inspection left a thick layer of glitter over everything, and Eric, of course, found the situation hilarious. He hummed a jaunty tune as he swept half-heartedly at the shimmering chaos with a broom, only succeeding in spreading it further. I, meanwhile, was attempting to salvage some sense of order, my tendrils twitching with suppressed irritation. "This is unacceptable," I muttered, gathering glitter-covered nutrient packets from the floor. "If you had any respect for our shared space, this never would have happened." "Oh, come on, Thark," Eric said, leaning on the broom handle with that insufferable grin of his. "You've got to admit, it's a little funny." "It is not funny," I snapped. "We were nearly evicted because of your recklessness." "Nearly," he pointed out. "But we weren't. So, technically, no harm done." I shot him a glare, but he just chuckled and returned to his lackadaisical cleaning. Clearly, he wasn't going to take any of this seriously. It was infuriating, but also strangely predictable. For all his flaws, Eric had an uncanny ability to turn every situation into a joke. And, as much as I hated to admit it, that trait was starting to grow on me. "You know," he said, tossing the broom aside, "I think what you need is a little fun." "I do not require fun," I said stiffly. "I require order and stability." "That's exactly why you need fun," he countered, pulling a small device from his pocket. It was sleek and unfamiliar, with a faint blue glow emanating from its center. "And lucky for you, I've got just the thing." "What is that?" I asked warily. "This," he said, holding it up like a prized artifact, "is my latest invention. I call it the Mood Enhancer." I narrowed my ocular membranes at him. "That sounds ominous." "It's not," he assured me, pressing a button on the device. A soft, melodic hum filled the room, accompanied by a gentle wave of light that washed over everything. "See? Totally harmless." I hesitated, waiting for some kind of catastrophic malfunction, but nothing happened. The hum was oddly soothing, and the light had a calming effect on my frazzled nerves. For a moment, I almost forgot how much I despised his antics. "It's pleasant," I admitted reluctantly. "Right?" He grinned, clearly pleased with himself. "Now, imagine this, you, me, and a little relaxation time. I've got a whole setup planned." I stared at him, suspicious. "What kind of setup?" "You'll see," he said, already heading toward the common area. "Just trust me." Trusting Eric was a dangerous proposition, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed him, bracing myself for whatever absurdity he had in store. What I found was unexpected. The room had been transformed into what humans call the date-night setting. The lights were dimmed, candles flickered on every surface, and the table was set with an assortment of questionable-looking earth foods. At the center of it all was Eric, holding a bottle of some kind of sparkling liquid and wearing an expression of exaggerated charm. "What is this?" I asked, utterly baffled. "This," he said, gesturing grandly, "is my apology. Thought I'd make it up to you with a little human hospitality." I didn't buy it for a second. "This is another one of your pranks, isn't it?" "Not this time," he said, pouring the sparkling liquid into 2 glasses. "Scout's honor." I didn't know what a scout was, but I highly doubted Eric had ever been one. Still, the effort he'd put into this display was impressive. And the smell of the food was surprisingly enticing. "Fine," I said, sitting down across from him. "But if this turns into another disaster, I will not be held responsible for my actions." "Deal," he said with a grin, sliding a glass toward me. "Now, let's toast to new beginnings." I eyed the glass suspiciously. "What is this?" "Just a little bubbly," he said. "Nothing dangerous, I promise." Reluctantly, I took a sip. The liquid fizzed against my palate, its flavor both strange and oddly enjoyable. I set the glass down, watching as Eric dug into the food with gusto. Despite my reservations, I found myself relaxing. "So," he said between bites, "what's the verdict? Best roommate ever, or best roommate ever?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," I said dryly. "This is a minor improvement at best." Hey, I'll take what I can get, he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. For a moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the absurdity of the situation. Eric's antics might have been infuriating, but they also had a strange way of making life interesting. And, as much as I hated to admit it, I was starting to see the appeal of his chaotic humor. But of course, Eric couldn't let things end on a peaceful note. As the evening wore on, he revealed his true intentions. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair with a mischievous grin, I had another idea for a prank. I groaned. Eric, no. Hear me out, he said, holding up his hands. It's harmless. Just a little something to mess with the Galactic Housing Authority. Absolutely not, I said firmly. We're already on thin ice. Exactly, he said. Which is why it's the perfect time for a little payback. I glared at him, but he just laughed, raising his glass in another toast. To chaos, he said, his grin widening. And to keeping things interesting. Despite myself, I couldn't help but smile. Life with Eric might have been chaotic, but it was never boring. And in the end, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all.